The Chainsaw Consultant boss in Toontown Corporate Clash is commonly regarded as the hardest boss in the entire game. I can't help but agree with this. I've had 4 successful Chainsaw Consultant runs and about 11 unsuccessful runs, either due to me going sad or another player going sad, making the rest of the battle unwinnable. That is a 36% completion rate every time I enter this boss fight. This honestly deters me from wanting to grind the Chainsaw Consultant for drops, due to how many boss rewards I've wasted in an unsuccessful run. I can't help but wonder why it's so easy to go sad in this boss fight. My theory is that due to how complex this fight is, and how much you have to memorize to understand the fight in its fullest, causes most people to go in having barely any idea what they're doing and hoping that there's someone in there that can guide them. And what if there isn't someone in the group that can guide? Well, then the chances of a successful run become much lower. So I got the idea to create a video doing my best to explain everything you need to know about the battle, as well as the basic strategies most groups tend to follow, in hopes that it can help some players understand the mechanics of this fight. The Chainsaw Consultant boss fight is split up into 3 separate phases. Phase 1 is active as soon as you enter the fight. Phase 2 occurs when the boss reaches below 8,500 health, and Phase 3 occurs as soon as he hits under 4,500 health. In this guide, I will be explaining everything you need to know about each phase, as well as the basic strategy to get through them. But first, let's talk about RPM. Going into the fight, you'll immediately notice the giant meter on the right side of the screen. This is the Chainsaw Consultant's RPM meter. Each white arrow represents a cheat that the boss gains access to once the red arrow reaches it. 10,000 RPM is the minimum he can have, and 20,000 is the maximum. If certain conditions are met, then the Chainsaw Consultant will spend some of his RPM to use a cheat. So how does the Chainsaw Consultant gain RPM? He gains RPM by revving up. How much he revs up is dependent on a few factors. He gains 1,000 RPM for every gag that hits him, so if the group used 1 lure and 3 throw on him and everything hit, he would gain 4,000 RPM. He will gain an additional 1,000 RPM if all 4 regular cogs are defeated in a single round. Lastly, he will gain an additional 2,000 RPM every round that he does not use a cheat. This additional 2,000 RPM is referred to as Whipsaw. Whipsaw only occurs in phases 1 and 3. Another important thing I should note is that in phases 1 and 3, the higher RPM the Chainsaw Consultant has, the higher damage he will deal. In phase 2, the lower RPM he has, the more damage resistance he will have. So now that you understand what RPM is, and how the boss gains RPM, let me start breaking down each phase. First, I'm going to explain all of the cheats in phase 1. The bottommost arrow in the first phase is the cheat Offboarding. The Chainsaw Consultant will gain access to this cheat at a total of 12,000 RPM, and it costs him 2,000 to use it. When Offboarding activates, the Chainsaw Consultant will literally fire a cog at a player. The damage that will be dealt is dependent on the health and level of the cog fired. To calculate this, simply divide the current health of the cog by the maximum health of the cog. Multiply that by 3, and then multiply that by the cog's level. If the cog is at full health, which it most often is, you can quickly calculate the damage by multiplying 3 by the cog's health. For example, if the Chainsaw Consultant fires a level 12 cog at full health, you would just have to calculate 3 times 12. 3 times 12 is 36, which means that it will deal 36 damage. There are 3 ways to trigger this cheat. The first way is by damaging a regular cog without destroying it. The second way is by using a pink slip on a cog and firing them. And the third trigger is if there are 2 promoted cogs on the field from his Cut the Slack cheat. If none of these conditions are met, then the cheat will not trigger. The second arrow on the meter is the cheat called Cut the Slack. He will gain access to this cheat at 13,000 RPM, and it will cost him 3,000 to use it. When Cut the Slack activates, the Chainsaw Consultant will snap his fingers, sacrificing every low-level cog in the battle and promoting the highest level cog to an even higher level executive cog. Note that the cog promoted by Cut the Slack will gain manager benefits and cannot be fired or sued. It will also gain lure resistance. If the promoted cog is defeated, the Chainsaw Consultant will get the debuff called Kickback, which will cause him to take more damage for 2 rounds. While this debuff is good to have, it is not worth triggering this cheat and defeating the cog in order to get it. In fact, Cut the Slack is often considered the most annoying cheat in the entire fight, and triggering it should be avoided whenever possible. This cheat can only activate if no cogs are destroyed while he has access to the cheat. So in order to prevent Cut the Slack from activating, the group should ensure that one cog is destroyed on a round that Cut the Slack is available. The third arrow from the bottom is the cheat Marked Wood. He will gain access to this cheat at 17,000 RPM and it will cost him 7,000 to use it. When activated, the Chainsaw Consultant will throw a log of wood at the toon who has dealt the most damage, or in the case of an IOU trigger, he will throw the log at the toon who used the IOU. The toon hit by the Marked Wood cheat will be dealt damage equivalent to 33% of their max health, or only 1 damage if the toon is already below 33% of their max health. Therefore, you cannot go sad from getting hit by the log. A debuff is then applied to the toon that causes them to take 75% more damage the following round. The Chainsaw Consultant is also guaranteed to attack the marked toon unless another toon attacks a Chainsaw Consultant that round. This cheat has 3 different triggers. The first way to trigger the cheat is by having all 4 toons successfully damage the Chainsaw Consultant. Note that in this case, Lure does not count as an attack. The second trigger is by having only 1 toon attack the Chainsaw Consultant. Lastly, the third trigger is if a toon uses an IOU. Due to the other triggers being RNG dependent, most people will use an IOU to trigger this cheat. I'll explain that in more depth once I go over the strategy of Phase 1. The topmost arrow is the cheat called Deadwood. He will immediately use this cheat if he hits 20,000 RPM. When this cheat activates, he will fire every toon out of the battle with a cannon. This cheat is essentially an insta-lose. There is no way to avoid it. If you reaches the top arrow in Phase 1, you lose. The good news is that this technically doesn't count as going sad, so you'll still have your current laugh and gags once you're fired out. As long as your group is triggering enough cheats to ensure his RPM never reaches 20,000, you'll be fine. So here's the basic strategy for Phase 1. The very first round he does not have access to any cheats, therefore you're free to really do anything here. Most people will either squirt and 3 drop or lure and 3 throw here. Make sure you are paying close attention to the RPM meter on the right. If the red arrow is at or above the first white arrow, that means he only has access to offboarding. This isn't anything to worry about. Just attack the Chainsaw Consultant or tune up where necessary. Don't worry about dealing any damage to the regular cogs at this RPM. If the red arrow is at or above the second white arrow, that means he now has access to Cut the Slack. Remember, it's very important to destroy 1 cog when he has access to this cheat. So if the red arrow is above the second white arrow but hasn't reached the third white arrow, destroy a single cog. The rest can lure, attack the boss, or tune up. It doesn't matter as long as 1 cog is destroyed. If the red arrow is at or above the third white arrow, that means he has access to Marked Wood. 1 toon should use an IOU to trigger the Marked Wood cheat. The IOU used doesn't matter, so you can use a Barnacle Bessie, a Flippy, or even a Rain, and it will still trigger the cheat. The rest of the group can again lure, attack the Chainsaw Consultant, use a tune-up, etc. One important thing I should note is that the Chainsaw Consultant can only use 1 cheat at a time, and you will prioritize the higher RPM cheats over the lower ones. So if the red arrow is at or above the third white arrow and someone is using an IOU, you do not have to worry about destroying a cog to prevent Cut the Slack because the Marked Wood trigger will be prioritized. So just follow that basic strategy for the rest of the first phase until the Chainsaw Consultant reaches below 8,500 health. At this point, Phase 2 of the fight will begin. Now let's talk about Phase 2. Once the Chainsaw Consultant has hit below 8,500 and the cogs have already finished attacking, a short cutscene will play showing Chip attempting to fight the personality override. It will then seem as if he's going to use Deadwood before he breaks one of the bulbs on the side of his hat. The cannons will fall and slam down on the toons, dealing 50% of their current laugh. Note that because this only deals 50% of current laugh in this cutscene, there is no need to use a Unite as there is no way to go sad. You may notice that the RPM meter flips, and now the danger zone is at the bottom of the meter. This reflects in the fight as well. The goal of Phase 1 was to prevent the RPM from getting too high, but in Phase 2, the goal is to prevent the RPM from getting too low. As I said closer to the beginning of this video, the lower his RPM is in this phase, the more damage resistance he will have, so it's important to keep his RPM high. Now, just like the first phase, I'm going to go through every cheat. The bottom arrow in this cheat is called throttle. This cheat will automatically trigger if his RPM is at 10,000, which is the minimum RPM he can have. When the cheat activates, he will attempt to use Deadwood and then interrupt it in the middle, just like the transition cutscene. There are two things that are different from this cheat compared to the transition cutscene. Unlike the cutscene, the cannons will deal 50% of your toon's max health rather than their current health. This means that if your toon is below half health, you will go sad from this cheat. Surviving toons will be given a 25% damage vulnerability for 1 round. This cheat can be pretty dangerous, so it's recommended to prevent this cheat from activating whenever possible. The next cheat I want to talk about is Spark Plug. This cheat is not on the RPM meter, but it can still activate at any time as long as its conditions are met. This cheat causes the Chainsaw Consultant to lose 2000 RPM. When this cheat activates, the Chainsaw Consultant will zap the current highest laugh toon. This will cause him to take 20 damage every round over the course of 2 rounds. This cheat will only trigger if no other cheat is triggered that round. Note that Spark Plug cannot activate twice in a row. If he were to use it a second time, he will use the cheat Aggrandize instead. This cheat also cannot activate if the Chainsaw Consultant has the kickback debuff. This next cheat is actually on the RPM meter, and it is called Aggrandize. The Chainsaw Consultant gains access to this cheat at 13,000 RPM and costs him 3,000 RPM to use. When triggered, the Chainsaw Consultant will promote the cog closest to him. The promoted cog will also be unable to be fired or sued. You can think of this cheat as basically cut the slack without the sacrificing or lure resistance. Any additional uses of Aggrandize on a cog who has already been promoted will fully heal the cog and promote them to an even higher level. There are 4 ways this cheat can trigger. The first way it can trigger is if a cog is damaged but not destroyed. The second trigger is if there is only 1 additional cog in the battle at the end of the round. The third trigger is if somebody sues a cog, and the final trigger is if no other cheat can activate and he's already used Spark Plug once. The third arrow from the bottom is the cheat called Chain Linked. He will gain access to this cheat at 15,000 RPM and it costs him 5,000 RPM to use. When this cheat activates, the Chainsaw Consultant will link every cog in the battle together, including himself. Each cog will give all cogs to the right of it a 25% damage resistance buff. So the farther right the cog is in the battle, the higher its damage resistance will be. No new cogs will join the battle until all chain-linked cogs are defeated. Defeating all chain-linked cogs will give the Chainsaw Consultant the kickback debuff, causing him to take increased damage for 2 rounds. Note that Chain Linked cannot be triggered again while kickback is active. This cheat is triggered by having all 4 toons successfully damage the Chainsaw Consultant in a single round. Unlike the trigger for Marked Wood, Lure does count as an attack towards the Chainsaw Consultant for this trigger. The topmost arrow in this phase is the cheat called Scabbard. He gains access to this cheat at 17,000 RPM and it costs 7,000 RPM for him to use it. When triggered, the Chainsaw Consultant will heal all other cogs in the battle by 50% of their maximum health. If they are at full health, this will overcharge them. This cheat is only triggered if no regular cogs are damaged and Chain Linked is not triggered. It's important to note that while this cheat does cost more RPM, it has a lower priority than Chain Linked. So even if the Chainsaw Consultant has access to this cheat, it won't be activated if the conditions to trigger the Chain Link cheat are met. Here's the strategy for Phase 2. The most commonly used strategy for this phase is pretty straightforward. Just continually damage the Chainsaw Consultant until he gains enough RPM to have access to Chain Linked. It's important to try and get Chain Link active before Spark Plug has a chance to trigger twice, causing him to Aggrandize. You can ensure this by prioritizing as many hits against the Chainsaw Consultant as possible. Once the Chainsaw Consultant has reached the Chain Linked milestone, ensure that all 4 toons attack the Chainsaw Consultant. Gags missing will mess up the Chain Link trigger, so it's better to use the Lure and 3 Throw rather than using Drop due to Drop's individual accuracy rolls. Once Chain Linked has been triggered, the strategy for defeating the Chain Linked cogs is as follows. On the first round, 1 toon uses Squirt on the cog on the far left. Zap Gag should then be used to ensure 2 cogs are destroyed. If pulled off correctly, the 2 cogs will be destroyed and you'll only have 2 regular cogs left. At this point, use the same zap strategy to take out the 2 remaining cogs. Once all the regular cogs are defeated, the Chainsaw Consultant will be given the kickback debuff for 2 rounds. This is the best opportunity to deal heavy damage to him. Wedding cakes and grand pianos are recommended at this point in the fight to get him to transition into phase 3 as soon as possible. If you're unable to deal enough damage for him to transition into phase 3 before the kickback debuff wears off, you can always repeat this process until he does transition. Now it's time for phase 3. Once the Chainsaw Consultant reaches 4,500 health, a short cutscene will play in which the Chainsaw Consultant's personality override will take full control once again. Phase 3 is, for the most part, the same as Phase 1, although it has a few key differences that makes this fight more intense. For starters, all RPM gained from Rev Up is doubled. This makes it almost impossible to prevent his RPM from getting too high. The good news is that Deadwood is no longer present. The bad news is that it has been replaced by a new cheat called Layoffs. Just like Deadwood, it will immediately activate if he is at 20,000 RPM with no way to prevent it. When Layoffs activates, he will fire one cog at every tune. This is just like the cheat Offboarding, but it hits every tune in the battle. One very important thing to note is that the damage calculation for Layoffs is different from Offboarding. With Offboarding, you would multiply by 3, but with Layoffs, you would multiply by 4. So with Offboarding, a level 12 cog would deal 36 damage, but with Layoffs, that same level 12 cog would deal 48 damage. So here's the strategy to follow for Phase 3. Again, the strategy is exactly the same as Phase 1. Prevent Cut the Slack by destroying a cog, use an IOU to trigger marked wood, etc. I should note that preventing Cut the Slack from triggering in this phase is a much higher priority. Assuming it's at full health, a cog promoted to level 30 will deal 120 damage to a tune when fired from Layoffs, so avoid Cut the Slack as much as possible. The highest level a cog can be in this fight, disregarding promoted cogs from Cut the Slack, is level 15. A level 15 cog will deal 60 damage when fired from Layoffs. Therefore, assuming there's no promoted cogs on the battle, below 61 laugh is considered the danger zone. If you or another tune is under 61 laugh and you haven't calculated damage from Layoffs, it's good to use a tune-up unite just to be safe. Tune-up has a huge priority in this phase due to just how dangerous it is to have tunes low on health. If your group is low on high-level tune-up gags, or just low on gags in general, and the Chainsaw Consultant still has a high amount of health, it's a good idea to use a gag-up unite to restock everyone's gags in this phase. The faster you can defeat the Chainsaw Consultant in this phase, the better. And there you have it. I hope this guide helped out those who were confused about this boss's mechanics. If you have any strategies or tips of your own, or if I got anything wrong in this guide, please feel free to leave a comment. Thank you for watching, and good luck in your Chainsaw Consultant battles.